Bim bom boom, feels good to be back. So, I'm sure you've watched a zombie show or movie before and thought, I'd probably do better than that. And thus, this video's idea was born. How would the average person do in a zombie apocalypse scenario? Now, let's set out some ground rules first. An assumption being that these zombies are of more than one type, starting with the walker. They're slow, dumb, your typical zombie. Then you have the runners. Think of the zombies of World War Z. These zombies aren't necessarily smart, but they certainly are fast, which is a problem. And then we have specialized zombies. We're picking the worst of the bunch, the hunters of Left 4 Dead, with their extreme hunting prowess, and the clickers with their area denial ability from The Last of Us. However, we won't be including their fungal nature. I'm not that much of an ass. These zombie types ensure that this is the absolute worst case scenario. It's better to prepare for the worst than prepare for the best. All of these zombies will be underneath the living branch of zombies, much like we covered in my other video on zombies. Having them being living beings instead of rotting corpses gives us an immediate need to get good around working around them, instead of just simply waiting 2 or so weeks for the infection to just die out, like with other scenarios such as Shaun of the Dead or 28 Days Later. The outbreak will be a viral disease spreading through blood and saliva. This virus has key symptoms before later turning the person. They are as follows: sweating, nausea, auditory sensitivity, paranoia. This will be a clear way to identify the virus, both in the early stages and in the future. The time it takes to turn will be around a day or so, give or take, depending on the health of the host. The virus can only infect humans, and it cannot make the jump between species because science bullshit. So, what can we presume in the early stages of the outbreak? Well, we can definitely presume that the sudden flood of patients into hospitals would immediately set off alarm bells at the WHO and other medical institutions around the world, at least for the first day from being noticed. Past the first day, many of the patients would have fully turned and would officially begin this outbreak. We can make the case here that they either would start out as the runner or walker variants, as those do not require any further evolution, other than the virus already being in their system. It starts about the same as most zombie situations that you'd expect. They run around chomping into whoever they see and either kill or infect them in the process. Now, a vast majority of people would be mauled to death or infected during such an outbreak. From this point, one of 2 things can happen. As the survivors call the police and whatever contacts they have, it will start a butterfly effect that leads to a lot of people both trying to get into the outbreak's reach and escape it. The ones going in would be emergency services, and the ones trying to escape being survivors. Whether these survivors are fully healthy or not, that's impossible to know. However, they most likely would not all be fine, leading to the natural spread of the outbreak. So, first responders make it into the outbreak zone, and they very quickly realize that this isn't just some prank or some hoax. It's a serious threat. They will either call in and notify the government to call in the best of the best to try and contain it, or they simply won't have enough time to call it in, dying whilst at the scene and going dark with the rest of the station that sent them. Let's go on to the worst of these and say that the first responders never got to call it in. Whilst the disappearance would still be noticed, it would definitely give the zombies a bit longer to spread and infect more. Luckily, in this modern world, we have social media. It's no secret that at least one person would probably start live streaming or tweeting about the outbreak, inevitably leading to the government imposing a lockdown of the affected areas, possibly even handing over the governmental keys over to the military in order to contain the virus. Martial law for those who need the technical term. In this situation, the military is dispatched to contain the outbreak, but unfortunately it can be assumed they won't be able to do much about it, especially not things that are drastic like carpet bombing the entire zone, as that would be an absolute nightmare to publicly justify, with the surviving population just being killed just the same as zombies. So they'd have to enforce a quarantine zone, and hopefully hold the line. Whether they do or not, doesn't matter. Let's just focus on you. First things first, you're in your home and you see the outbreak on fucking TikTok or some shit. First thing that you want to do, get the bath running. Fill as many containers as physically possible with water, as you won't have very long till most utilities either fall apart completely or simply get cut off, possibly around a few weeks to a month. Importantly, leave one single lamp on at a hidden place for a specific reason. You want as few signs that you're alive as is possible. Other survivors are likely going to be hostile as the rule of law falls apart and everyone starts going straight into their own survival mode. But the reason we're leaving just one light on that only we can see is so we can actually tell if the power's on or off. Put absolutely everything on charge. You may not get another chance for a very long time. Put your brightness down as far as possible, and for the love of God, stop watching things on your devices. Just save the battery for as long as you can. You can watch this video again, don't worry, I'm sure someone will save it for you. Now obviously, you're not going to want to go outside. It smells of rotten flesh, blood and all that jazz. Obviously, it's dangerous. But you do have to go out for supplies whether you like it or not. Your ability to do this will likely decide how your time in the apocalypse goes. Even going out at all is a huge step. But first, before we go, think about what you're wearing. If you're a woman, which is unlikely considering this channel's on analytics, don't wear heels. Ahem. Don't wear heels. You should be wearing thick boots, capable of a good stomp, a bag, something with a lot of capacity like a backpack or a rucksack, and any and all thick clothing. You need all that extra padding. Consider wearing items such as biking helmets, shoulder pads, knee pads. You need them all, use them. You'll be needing to avoid contact as much as possible. Key recommendations underneath all that would be thick jackets and shirts. Think denim and leather to prevent the typical zombie biting along with any other scratches or cuts you might come across. Make sure you bring two types of weapons. One long arm blunt weapon, such as a baseball bat or a shovel, and one sharp edged weapon, such as a kitchen knife. The long arm blunt weapon is your main workhorse, and should you come into contact with zombies, it'll definitely put them down quickly. Your sharp edged weapon is more of a tool and a method to quickly take out infected quietly. So, now that you're on your way out and fully equipped, I sure do hope you know your way around where you live, at least well enough to traverse effectively and stay out of sight, as that's what you should be really attempting. Many people will likely charge the zombies head on and try to kill every last one of them. And whilst this can work in larger groups, it also has the issue of potentially drawing unwanted attention to yourself and those with you. Ideally, the best way to traverse throughout the apocalypse is sticking to the back streets, as they always have multiple exits through back doors and such, and it also keeps you off the main road, which should be avoided as much as possible. Walking in the middle of the street will have a lot of danger with it. Whilst it does make it very easy to see where you are and what's around you, it also makes you stick out like a sore thumb underneath all that flat asphalt right beneath your feet. Save it for when you really need to use it and kill off a few zombies if you can. A smart survivor could keep track of these corpses to follow you. Now when you're looting, there's a few things you need to think about. Firstly, how much stuff you can actually fit into your bag, but also your pockets, plus whatever exactly you're looking for. Key items would be any type of food. Keep your eye out specifically for non-perishable canned foods, such as beans or corn, as these can last up to years without refrigeration, as I'm sure you're aware of. Try to grab some fresh produce too while you're there, regardless if it's rotten or not. You'll be needing it. That's the only special items I'd recommend getting food-wise. Remember that many things such as chocolate bars are simply going to go extinct for a while, as natural cocoa is indigenous to areas around the equator, and judging by analytics, you're likely not from around there. Although if you are, leave a comment and flex your natural chocolate making capabilities. Back to looting and moving on from food. Start to take as many medical and cleaning products as you possibly can, even the ones that you are unlikely to typically want. You may have the chance to trade these at a later date in the apocalypse, assuming you survive that long. Another thing that you should definitely take while you're looting is lighters. Not just one or two, a lot. Fire is going to be your best friend once the power goes out, and when you lose heating, it definitely will save your life. If you don't have enough blankets to go around, now will be the time to grab some. By now your bag is probably getting quite full, but there's still something that you're going to need more than anything. Drinks. Skip the alcohol, as a vast majority of it won't even be strong enough to sterilize wounds, and I would definitely advise against getting drunk during the outbreak. The drinks you should be looking for vary, but pretty much anything non-alcoholic would be good. One thing to keep in mind when handling carbonated drinks like pop is that it can be prone to, well, not handling pressure very effectively, we'll say that. If you're going to go out of your way to get pop though, it's surprisingly good, especially for the outbreak. The added sugar and electrolytes in most of these drinks will actually keep you alert and even suppress your appetite for a little while, as carbonated drinks slow down how quickly food moves through your stomach, leading to feeling full for longer. Once you're done with the store, you should try to head home and try to avoid bumping into anyone else while you're out. It may only be the beginning of the apocalypse, but most zombie media makes it very apparent that the most dangerous thing during the apocalypse isn't actually the zombies, but instead your fellow human survivors. We know how people can get. Imagine Black Friday sales with no laws and everything's free. That's essentially what the first wave of looting would be like. I wouldn't recommend fighting other people. If someone has the upper hand on you, then I'd rather lose some beans than my life. Hopefully you'll make it home safely, and when you do, you have to make sure that your living space is going to be safe for a longer period of time. In this scenario, we're imagining that you live alone with no pets. However, those with pets will definitely have a rough time. I'd recommend letting your pet run free and live a life on its own, as most house pets won't contribute well to fighting the infected. Once you make it home, you should try to lay out all the food you have and start taking inventory. The things you're going to want to note down are the number of food items you have, their caloric intake, and most importantly, their expiration date. The average person needs a certain amount of calories to function, ranging from 1,800 calories to 2,400 calories for an adult per day. Then take the number of calories your food stockpile has and then take away, we'll say, 2,000 calories for simplicity's sake. Then keep doing this until you've gone through all of your food. You'll be left with how many days of food you have. Same going for water. The average amount of water an adult needs ranges from 2.7 litres to 3.7 litres, 91 to 125 ounces for you Americanos. Check how much each of your containers keep and try to not go over your daily requirements, as every sip you take from now on affects the sips you take in the future. Obviously at the beginning of the outbreak while the water's still running, take advantage of that. From this point on, you can't take a day off. Every day you spend should be used on something, whether it be going out looting or making your home more secure. We've dealt with the first one, but now let's work on the second one. Obviously you should lock your doors and windows, that should go without saying, but you should also make sure that you shut every single blind and make it impossible for anyone to see inside. This will keep both you and your loot a lot safer, unless you feel comfortable with the prospect of other people potentially finding you out. I'd recommend passing up on boarding windows. Obviously, a window like that would be extremely suspicious in a world of broken and wide open windows. When looking at your home, you should think, if a zombie gets into this room, how can I escape? Your home should have at least 2 exits should anything bad happen. If zombies coming through one exit, you can always slip through out the other. Another key thing that you can immediately do is some interior designing. Ideally, you'd want to have clear spaces to defend from. Look at this design for an airlock system. This way you can attack any zombie that gets through the door without having to get too close. You should have almost every sitting area in the room pointed towards an entrance or an exit. That way, even when you're relaxing and doing something else, you can still possibly get a glance if anything strange seems to be happening. Other things that you should take into consideration is how you organize your rooms. Your living room should become your main line of defense. Design your living room in a way that favors you, should you have to fight in it. Your kitchen is now more or less a glorified storage area once power goes out. Make sure you've emptied out all the cabinets before your next room. Your bedroom will become the place where you want to keep all of your loot. That way, if anyone tries to ransack you in the night, you might just catch them in the act. Plus, if you're surviving with more than one person, which is likely, family, roommates, partners, that type of thing, then I'd recommend sleeping in the same communal room. But keep personal rooms as stashes, not for sleeping in, but instead like a storage unit that you keep your favorite things in, like your weapons, ammo, and whatever doohickeys you have. You probably will want to pick up a hobby or two. Writing, knitting, that sort of thing. You're gonna have a lot of spare time after all, and this is only getting started. So, you've been eating through your meals as we planned. Maybe you've had to go out once or twice to get some more, but it's finally happened. The power and the water have gone out. This signals 2 things. First being that the infection has not been contained as far as we know. The government may have fallen, and that from this point on, surviving is going to get a hell of a lot harder, and your life is largely going to rely on looting. This is likely the most lethal part of a zombie outbreak, the part where people have to fend for themselves with little to no help. It's not the zombies that are the most lethal in this stage, instead it's the other things that they can disrupt, like safe food, clean water, law, order. The immediate thing you have to start working on is getting a water source and at least a week's worth of stockpiled immediate food. The reason I'd recommend having above a week's worth is that it gives you a level of wiggle room. Should you really fuck up and end up stuck in your home, at least you'll have a little while's worth of food to wait it out. Now, food is probably the more easy of the two, but water is quite a bit harder. If you've been following the guidelines of last video, then you should have quite a reasonable amount of water before the faucets went dry. This can last you a little while, but it definitely isn't enough to just sustain yourself on. You need to be thinking about the long time ahead of you. Think of bottled water more like the way you see fine wine nowadays. It's a luxury item, and you're lucky to have it. So first things first, you need to get roof access to whatever building you're in, preferably safe roof access. However, the definition of safe is very quickly going to change from perfectly safe and couldn't harm you at all to suddenly being, well, you won't die, so that works. If you live in an apartment complex, you've already got a leg up there. But for those with houses without all too clear roof access, this is what you should do. Go around the back of your home with a ladder. If you don't have a ladder, then it should be your priority to get one. Then what you should do is tamper with this here. This is a gutter, designed as such so your roof doesn't accumulate tons worth of water and then promptly collapse on your head. Usually these gutters are attached to a pipe that guides the water down into the drainage system. That's not what we want. Depending on your pipe, you either want to break a chunk off or simply leave it. Try putting something like a bucket or anything that can hold a reasonable amount of water underneath it. This will be one of your many water collection methods, and this one is surprisingly clean depending on how your gutters are. Maybe with the complete freedom you now have, you could probably clean it out. Anyways, that's one way to get water, but obviously it's not a lot. That's why you should try having as many of these containers outside as is possible. The bigger the better. Buckets, cooking pots, and barrels are definitely your friend here. As the apocalypse continues, it'd be smart to upgrade these collection areas with tarp around the bigger objects. All these water catchers really are is an open top cube or an open top circle that really makes them quite simple to make. One way that you can make these is prevalently shown in projects on board. All you really need to do is make this, just a wooden box, and then line the inside of either a trash bag or tarp. Obviously tarp is the better option there, but hey, if it keeps you alive, then taste doesn't really matter, does it? Now, it should obviously go without saying that you need to boil this water in order to purify it. Do I even have to explain how to make a fire? Come on, everyone knows that. But for those who don't know how to make a fire somehow, I might as well cover it, since it's pretty much going to be the only thing that keeps you alive. To start a fire, you first need a cleared, dry area. That's before you even start looking for things to burn. Something that I'd recommend doing is setting up a rock outline around your fire to keep it stable. Whilst you don't necessarily have to do this, it's safer, and it can also make starting the fire in the first place a little bit easier. First, you need to find reasonably sized twigs and sticks, all dry. You know what, instead of me having to state that it's all dry, just assume that when I'm making a fire, it has to be dry. Pretty common sense. Now, the way you would want to set these twigs up is sort of like a pyramid shape. Don't put too many sticks on it though, as this could just smother your fire. Make sure you leave a space underneath the pyramid for the next part, the igniting. Now, this part is probably the simplest. Just light something on fire. Key picks would be things like paper, rags. You don't even need fire starters if you're so lucky. Place the thing that you're going to ignite underneath the pyramid's middle, then light it. The reason the shape works is due to fire traveling further vertically than it does horizontally. Now, once you've got the pyramid to ignite, you can add larger pieces of wood, like planks or even logs. The reason you don't want to start with these is because it can actually be hard to set them on fire when starting off this small. Now, the reason we made this, boiling the water, there's many ways that we can actually do this, but the best one is this tripod-like design, or this other design found in DayZ. This stand lets you hang the metal container over the fire to boil it effectively. Obviously pick smaller containers for boiling, as these structures aren't perfect. Now, obviously there's other ways to get water. You could scavenge for bottles, but this likely isn't going to be very effective. Your target for scavenging should be things like water pipes and water heaters. These usually keep an amount of water actually inside them, thus making them a pretty reliable source of water in dire situations. Then you've got more sustainable methods such as rivers and streams. These are pretty dangerous though. If you don't boil these correctly or enough, you could just end up with cholera or worse. Also, you should definitely make sure that any stream that you're drinking from hasn't been contaminated. You do not want to be drinking dead zombie soup after all. However, if you're completely sure that this water isn't contaminated, feel free to boil away and drink it. After you boil any water, you should definitely bottle it up and save it till you need it. Now that we've got water sorted, it's food time. Food's obviously a serious priority. As well, we don't want to be starving to death now, do we? Looting is going to be your main source of food. Again, take the advice from the last video. Take cans, make sure they're in date. Try to take dried foods like rice, pasta, lentils. Try dried beans, that kind of thing. Especially backpacking and camping type foods. Always a great choice. Pot noodles.
Just got Snapchat. Time for a pot noodle and a wank. Streaks.
Lovely choices. Pretty much take anything you can see. However, there's other ways to get food. Think to hunting and farming. With the fall of humanity, animals and nature will start to reclaim the world. Whilst I'm not particularly well versed in the hunting world, it'd be probably around the same feeling, just in a new place. Then we come to farming. I think the majority of people think they know how to farm. Thank you, Minecraft, my beloved. However, it's unlikely that it'll be efficient. You can try farming and it might work out for you. You'll probably need the food it can produce over time, as looting takes far more energy than farming. Now, the foods you can actually farm will vary from place to place. Judging from my analytics, most of you are Americans, Brits, and other northwestern countries. The key foods that you could probably make in most of these countries would be things like potatoes, carrots, wheat, that kind of thing. If you want more in-depth information for the foods you can make in your country, I don't know, visit a farm or something? But now that you've got your bearings around your general survival things, it's time to tackle the issues that come with the post-apocalypse part of this situation. As pretty much every zombie movie and TV show likes to say, people are the worst, but quite frankly, that's going to be very true in this situation. You've seen how people get during Black Friday. Imagine what it would be like if every single law, regulation, price just simply didn't exist. Chaos. Pure, unfiltered chaos. That's something you're going to have to contend with. Most of the people are looking out for themselves, and they'll likely respond to you with hostility. But if you ever make contact with another survivor, try to be as vague as possible. Don't tell them a single bit of information that could give them a reason to treat you with hostility. In this kind of situation, you should trust your gut. If your gut tells you something is up, then you should get the hell out of there as fast as possible. In the apocalypse, the chances of finding someone like a selfless Samaritan are slim to none. If anyone offers you anything for free, they are likely going to kill you. They have no reason to give someone who they just met something for free. However, if you do meet another person, do try to trade with them. Specifically trade. Not only will this give you a peek into what this person is capable of, but it also could be a way for you to get items that you could use with. Early groups of survivors will likely start to form from pre-apocalypse friendship groups and groups of people with shared problems. These are going to be the majority of the living population. Little spread out groups of survivors. Whether or not these groups are all that efficient obviously depends on the people. However, groups come with other problems. Every single person is another risk. Let's say, for example, that you're the leader of one of these groups. You have around 3 to 5 people working with you, and you're mostly self-sustainable. A little commune. Everybody does their part. Now, what do you do when someone doesn't want to contribute? We could forgive them, which would very rapidly turn your little group into an infighting mess. Or we can punish. This is pretty much just a fancy version of old tribal law, now with pants. Ideally, we'd like to keep this little band together. Also ideally without killing anyone, but we still need a punishment to give. So, what's the fairest? I'd say that food rations are a good way to keep a functional system. If someone goes out looting, they should be given a reward in the rations. Whilst if they sit around and do nothing all day, maybe they should be punished and do more work, potentially withholding rations that they need. It's a harsh system, but it has a level of reliability. Personally, I don't like this system. I prefer the more heavy-handed approach. Everybody brings their own skills to the table, but if they don't have value that they can prove, cut them off. You can't afford to give anyone a free pass, regardless. Now, by now, you've probably outlined some pretty clear signs of infection, and you can see it coming from a mile away. What should you actually do with the infected individual though? Should a person in your group become infected, do we take the precautious option and just put them out their misery before they can cause any harm? I'd argue that we actually don't execute. Instead, we should take this opportunity to study the infected. Is this the moral option? Fuck no. But I'd rather know what I'm up against than be a good person, that's for sure. So how should we do this? Well, we obviously want to pick a place to keep the subject. The ideal would be a room with only one way out and no windows. If you don't have a space like that, then you can always board up a room that you aren't using, or better yet, use the neighbor's house for it. We also need some way to see inside this room from the outside, sort of like an observation window. There's a near infinite amount of ways that you can get this working, so I'll leave that part for you to figure out. Now obviously you aren't very likely to be happy about living so close to a mindless creature like that. So we should definitely take some precautions for our safety. One of the mildest of such would be to restrain the subject's hands. They haven't turned yet, so it's quite important that you keep a very close eye on their behaviour. and that you make sure that this person doesn't decide to suddenly opt out of this impromptu science project. We should note down some things like the date and time they were infected alongside their symptoms. Check in with them at regular intervals to see if anything changed, maybe in hourly increments or something like that. This way we can keep track of exactly how long it takes for the subject to turn, and if you scale this up a bit alongside time and your community's potential growth, you have a dataset to reference from, and the exact second you notice an inconsistency with this dataset, you cling to it. This could spell the future out for you, but don't get too excited just yet. We still have other things to deal with first. Not much has changed since the outbreak, at least looting wise. You're still looking for the same things and still using the same weapons to protect yourself. Obviously that's going to change soon. Now what are the chances of you finding a firearm while looting? 40% of my viewer base has a pretty high likelihood of finding their God-given constitutional right. And if you do find a firearm, don't be like this guy, or you just end up causing more problems than solving them. The sound of shooting a gun could attract more zombies. Think of guns as a last resort for if you absolutely can't win a fight, like against a large group of zombies, or better yet, hunt animals. Hunting is going to be your savior, and pair a good hunt with a strong fire and you're set to have an amazing time. However, getting the gun might not be the hard part of getting a firearm. Getting the ammo is. From this point on, ammo is also one of those things that's going to go extinct, save for a few scrappy and extremely dangerous custom ammunition. God, I'm definitely getting put on a list for half the stuff I searched making this video. But hey, it's worth it. Let's move on from firearms for a moment, as not everyone's going to find one, but there's a guarantee that people will find melee weapons. By now it's been a few weeks, and you've probably exhausted a few options and broke a couple things. So instead, let's make something that'll last. It's incredibly easy to make a better weapon. What I'll do is I'll tell you how to make certain parts, and then you can think of your own designs, starting with the improvised blade. This is made from pretty much any piece of sheet metal that is then sharpened on one or more sides. You could fashion this to be a small knife with some string, or even an axe head on top of a stick or a pipe. Make sure to serrate the edges if you're planning to use it as a cutting tool. The next is quite simple: nails. Literally just nails. You can put nails on just about anything and it suddenly becomes more lethal. The same goes for barbed wire. You can put it on just about anything and it suddenly turns it into a danger to society. You could even pull a Minecraft and build your own tools out of sticks and stones. And oh boy, you're gonna break some bones with those. Now, what do you call something when it has a severe lack of law and order? Anarchy. The entire world has been plunged straight into chaos. Nobody answers to a greater power anymore. Gangs and cliques are the closest thing to order that you're going to find for a while. The apocalypse essentially puts humanity back into another dark age. Living standards plummet, life expectancy practically ends after 65, and you spend your entire life fighting off sickness. At any point you could be killed off by simply making the wrong choice. You can expect many illnesses to plague the world alongside the zombie population. All that rotting, bitey flesh making a perfect method of infection. But it isn't just that. With the collapse of modern healthcare, small things could be lethal. Things like diabetes that often end up being more of an inconvenience in our pre-apocalypse world would suddenly become a very severe problem. Do you know how to make insulin or something like it? Because I sure as hell don't. Most of the things you take for granted today will go extinct as their numbers dry up. Now, I'm not gonna lie, I don't know how to make any remedies other than a cup of tea. But if you do, you should try to make as much of that as is possible. Natural remedies are going to be the closest thing to medicine or healthcare that you've got for a while. However, it isn't the healthcare that's going to be the most headache-causing thing for the surviving population. No, it'll be the bandits. When the world collapses, it will be bloodshed and ashes from which the new order rises. The question is, who will be these reclaimers? You can expect things like warlords, dictators, monarchists. Just about everything will be given a try in this new age. However, one day, order will return. Until then, all you can do is find ways to make this dark age a little bit more comfortable. So, where we left off last time, we were sort of at an impasse. Survivors are starting to come together and settle down, creating new civilizations in the post-apocalypse. You have your farmers, your hunters, your looters. Every cog is an important part of the new society. We can imagine the world coming to shape in more of a civilized medieval age. corporations are gone, people have total freedom to do as they please. It'd be hard at first, but once these villagers had dug their heels into the ground they settled, it'd take one hell of a storm for them to be removed. The type of storm we're talking about here is the new bandit craze. The complete collapse of laws and any real governments has seemed to spawn the rise of the apocalypse bandit culture. This dog-eat-dog mentality that now has become the norm will make the average time spent in this post-apocalyptic world in one of two mentalities. Either this extremely paranoid, self-serving dog-eat-dog lifestyle of pillaging and looting settlements and more places as they go, or this more relaxed and caring style of settlement and rebuilding. You can separate these more simply like this. The ones on the left are the anarchistic bandits that live on violence and fear-mongering through things like conquest and protection rackets, and on the right we have the settlers, the ones who want to rebuild society and make a sort of government. Either of these can be theoretically self-sufficient in some way, but the bandits suffer from not being able to farm effectively as they need to stay on the move, lest they become a settled civilization, which is a very probable outcome. Over an amount of time, a lot of bandit groups would probably settle down once they felt they were happy with what was in their coffers. However, you probably start to see a trend of bandits constructing their own sort of outposts. Not total settlements, but just enough to call it a base to operate from. These bandit groups are unstable by definition. Their leaders can't be at every single outpost at all times, so obviously there's going to be some severe issues with both chain of command and brutality. The more brutal bandit groups will obviously be some of the most dangerous, but that will also lead to a level of disloyalty, ensuring a natural amount of instability. The better a group can balance its authority and its outward image to the rest of the world, then the better for their general safety. They can't be too brutish as they want to keep loyal followers, but they also have to try to keep their teeth sharpened to make sure that their benefactors still pay up. The case is mostly reversed for the side of the settlers. However, their groups will likely revolve far less around destructive tendencies, instead revolving around more progressive things like better medicine, scientific breakthroughs, technological rejuvenation. It'd be a grand time to live in one of these more established and well-protected settlements. Just imagine all the usual things of medieval life, now with the most modern ailments. Whilst modern medicine and technology is probably falling apart by now, there's got to be at least a few working things and a couple extra meds laying around somewhere. But there's nothing stopping you from reverse engineering those things and making them yourself. It'd be like stumbling upon a gold mine. These settlements are a trader's paradise, assuming they have some sort of security or policing, which would be the main countermeasure against banditry. A defensive armed force tasked with defending the settlement. These groups are built for safety and a feeling of home. This is the new state of the world. Genius inventors, hopeful settlers, savage bandits, traders up to their necks in riches, and many of the groups off doing their own thing. We've just covered two of those groups. Let's take a look at the traders, shall we? Here's a question to pose to you. What makes your money worth anything at all? It's just paper, right? Not exactly, or at least it is now with governments going kaplooey. Originally, money was backed by gold, which you could trade in at the bank and just straight up get gold back. They stopped doing this for quite a few reasons, and ever since then, the only thing backing up cash is the fact that you'll get arrested for not using it. So what is the use of cash in an apocalypse? Well, fucking nothing. You're better off burning it. Most traders will opt for a bartering system, trading items for other items instead of some sort of currency. You'll probably see pretty common trades like materials for food, or certain specific items for certain other specific items. It will vary from trader to trader, as every single one of them will be after something else. That's where your ability to barter will come in. Haggling will be the only discount you'll find. Ain't no discount codes here. However, that may vary from customer to customer. Doing a specific job for a trader could possibly get you a discount, but we see a trend from time to time, at least in video games, that there's usually some sort of currency that overshadows absolutely everything. How close is that to reality? Well, it's probably not that far actually, considering we as a society made the switch over to metals and coins in the past. Who's to say we wouldn't do the same? The most likely choice is to go back to gold, silver, and bronze the same way we've been doing since 1000 BC. Value coming from the item's weight instead of what it's marked with. But what if we really did want to standardize a currency? Look at gaming once more. The obvious one pops its head up. Fallout and their caps. These are metal bottle caps that are commonly used as a currency region-wide. Fallout is actually a great rule of thumb. Many of the societies across Fallout stick to the bottle cap as a standard currency, but some groups, such as the New California Republic, print their own paper dollars, which were backed by gold originally, but upon being raided quickly became a fiat currency with no actual backing, which led to the birth of the bottle cap as a currency in itself. Caps are directly backed by water, thus giving them an actual value, and honestly, they aren't a half bad currency in the apocalypse at all. They're actually a great choice, as the technology to actually manufacture more of these is either broken or closely monitored, and that makes counterfeiting and inflation virtually a non-issue. They're durable, lightweight, and stable, thus they get the apocalypse seal of approval. However, just about anything can be a currency, but many will quickly fail. Food may seem like a pretty good choice, but it quite literally rots away over time, and well, that kind of throws saving out the window. Get your mind running. See if you can think of anything good to use as a currency and comment it below. I'm genuinely curious to hear suggestions. Moving on, remember those scrappy weapons we thought of last video? What if we took that same idea and then sized it up to a firearm or a sort of long arm? Over time, firearms are going to degrade if they're in the wrong hands. The ones with the modern firearms are a very privileged group, but if they don't care for their weapons, then they'll be just as helpless as they were without it. The privileged ones will merely have to clean and clear just as they've probably already been doing. The more responsible a nation's firearm culture is, the odds of finding a nice, functional firearm will be higher, scaling with its cultural ties. The United States being the obvious example with this, for their interesting culture around firearms. However, the ideal types of long arm for the apocalypse aren't actually what you'd expect. You don't want a big, loud minigun, as that thing's just going to attract more problems than it can deal with. Plus, it's going to chew through ammo quicker than you can actually find it. The ideal weapon would be used more for hunting or saved as a powerful last resort. Think of shotguns and rifles for that niche. Whilst your full auto rifles are obviously still a good choice, they likely won't always be fully loaded. It's a trade-off really. What you want to do is balance weight and effectiveness. If something is heavy and not too worth it, you shouldn't be carrying it. As for those scrappy firearms that were briefly mentioned before, all it takes is a bit of engineering know-how to turn some scraps into a firearm. Add some reverse engineering and you can make just about anything, so good luck on that front. Speaking of engineering, having just about any specific skill set or knowledge can very easily be turned into an asset. The entire world is a vast ocean of opportunities for the creative-minded, so go wild. Put together that extremely dangerous car that'll probably explode the second you put the keys in the ignition. It's your funeral after all, and at least you're going out in something cool. Do you remember how in the first video I mentioned that the zombies in the scenario aren't actually dead? Yeah, that mattered actually. You see, in many cases with zombies, you can't see them surviving for very long without some kind of evolution or mutation. And by letting these zombies being a living being, we can pull a sci-fi guess and say that they would probably evolve in some way. Last time we picked out 2 specific evolutions that would come up, to make sure there was a level of balance. It could be worse than this, and it definitely could be better. The ones we picked were hunters and a sort of clicker adjacent creature, without its typical fungal parts. The hunters are the main predator for humanity. They can pounce people and tear them limb from limb with ease. However, their power quickly falls off when survivors travel in groups. Think of the hunters as a more aggressive type of zombie that thrives on disorganized groups, but fails in most other situations, almost like an assassin. Then the part of the clickers that we're taking is their dormant stasis feature. This won't really be a special infected thing, but instead more of a commonly found need for the infected, as the number of easily chomped on humans suddenly plummets, and the infected have to rely on animals, to which they are unlikely to actually win against in most cases. However, against prey animals they have a better chance. This dormant state lets the infected have a longer lifespan, and lets the zombie use the nutrients from its recent kill more effectively. During this dormant state, they'll be pretty much asleep, awaiting some kind of sound or scent to signal the next meal. This could lead to the sort of nest-like areas that we see in Dying Light 2, where you have to weave between the infected as to not alert the entire building you're in. The zombies would just become a subsect of humanity, an offshoot caused by the virus. Whether these infected could actually evolve further and become intelligent really depends on the situation. There's not many ways to track the direction that the infected are going evolutionary without some kind of scientific intervention. Whilst it's incredibly risky, the idea of studying and housing a number of infected would be the only way to track the direction they're going. However, I do see the risk entwined with them. It's up to you if you want to go ahead with those studies or not. This would probably be a pretty hot button issue when it comes to the post-apocalyptic political world. We're not covering that though. This is how to survive, not how to make your favourable society. Now with all this settling down and rebuilding, we find another thing. A new generation of people would be born without the knowledge of what the world was like before the apocalypse. What was sci-fi to us will be natural life to them. They probably find it bewildering to think about what our society was like before it all collapsed. It's our responsibility as the elders to teach the new generation of what came before. With the new generation growing in this world, they'll probably have some issues right off the bat. Think childhood trauma, as that would probably be through the roof considering their lives are now entangled with death. It's important to teach the difference between humans and the infected. Emphasize the point that they aren't like us anymore, although at some point they were. This new generation will probably look at our retelling of the world with doe eyes, imagining mountains of food and endless lounging, whilst comparatively, yeah, sure, that's true. Be sure to remind them that it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows, but I won't tell you how to raise the next generation. They don't even exist yet, and probably won't exist for a while. Until then, we can only speculate about them. Consider this an open invite to discussion in the comments. What would the next generation really be like? I guess we'll just have to see, right? One thing that we know for a fact is that we need to keep alive. Shocker. A key thing that would come into play would be traps. It only takes one little grenade attached to some fishing wire to turn you into a smouldering sludge. Check doorways as you enter them for things like wire, spikes, and just about anything you could call a trap. One of the most dangerous of these would be the classic bear trap. You know it just as well as I do. Something steps on the middle plate, it goes down, triggers the trap, and suddenly your leg is gone. The reason that one of these is the most dangerous of all the traps is that it's silent. It's not deafening like the explosive options, and thus it could take out a looter without anyone being aware, as that's what causes the most deaths at this stage. Sound is going to be one of the most powerful killers worldwide. Sound attracts not just the infected, but also other survivors. Weapons like bows and other silent methods of killing. Think suppressors. No, not silencers. Silencers don't exist. These are your safest bet. Otherwise, you're using melee for everything, and by now, I'd assume you aren't half bad at it. But I'm sure you're going to want a firearm. And with that comes a few problems. One being, they're fucking loud. Like Jesus, ouch. Let's fix that, shall we? Your first thoughts are probably going to be to slap a suppressor on it and call it a day, but well, they're not particularly common. Oil filters. Oh yeah, we're going there. Turns out you can actually use an oil filter as a suppressor. This isn't even gaming bullshit, this actually works. Slap an oil filter to the muzzle of your gun and bam. Just make sure you do it after the apocalypse, as it's actually a felony. Now you've got a far quieter firearm that can be a legitimate option. Just remember that it's not John Wick levels of quiet. They're not that good. Another choice that you could go for is a bayonet made from pretty much any sharp object you have laying around. Scissors, screwdrivers, old kitchen knives, bonus points if they're rusty, but still sharp. Even if you don't take the opponent out, you can die peacefully knowing that they'll probably have tetanus. Speaking of which reminds me, medicine. We quickly scraped over it before and a couple times in the other parts, and thus I did some research. Number one piece of knowledge, if you get something stuck in you, do not pull it out. You should not, under any circumstance, try to yank something out of your body. It will probably cause more damage on the way out than it did on the way in, not to mention the bleeding. You can stop bleeding in many ways, bandages being the key pick. The main thing that makes a bandage into a bandage is pretty much just the fact that they're often completely sterile, meaning there's no bacteria or pathogens on them, or at least very few. I had to look at alcohol again to see if it really could be a sterilizing agent in the way that we're going to find it, and turns out yes. It absolutely could work. If the alcohol you're working with is anywhere above 60%, then it should theoretically work. You can even replace a few of your modern medicines with some more natural methods that are much more sustainable for you in the long run. Honey works great as a replacement for cough medicine so long as you're over the age of 1, which, well, yeah, probably. If you have any kind of burns, which let's face it, by now you probably do with all the Molotovs and insane pyromaniacs running around, you can actually use aloe vera, which legitimately works to help the healing process and even makes it less painful. Mother Nature has the solutions to your problems, which she probably caused, but we'll ignore that. Another thing that comes directly from nature that will help our farmers is actually remarkably simple. You see, a problem that will come with farmers is things like slugs and snails chomping away at their produce. But if you grind down some eggshells until it sort of forms like a powder, it'll actually be sharp enough to the point where it can discourage them from your produce. I know this series has revolved a lot around looting and, well, less moral methods to success, but there's plenty of ways to get what you need without violating your own moral code. The apocalypse may be a brutal place, but it'll treat you the way you treat it. If you're a deranged psychopath tearing your way through every single town with murder on your mind, you're public enemy number 1. But if you're a friendly community of farmers and inventors, you'll probably be one of the most liked groups. It's truly up to you. However, Don't expect to not have your hand forced from time to time. Remember, you can't always be the nice one. Sometimes you have to make that rash decision. I hope you know what you're doing. Wow, this has been a really fun series to make, and I hope you enjoyed. Thank you for watching this video, and I'll see you in the next one. I'd greatly appreciate it if you liked and subscribed. However, you don't have to. I hope you have a good day, and here's some luck for your travels. Bye-bye.